And that's something that's so important for every system we create. Because like a behavior system that we create, like some of you are here from a Head Start or from early childhood, and we have talked, I mean, all over the country, we have talked about this. The assessment in early childhood, right? When you assess and you go in and you see who's being good and who's being bad, even though we never use those words, who tends to be assessed as not very good? More boys, right? Absolutely, more boys. Remember that those beautiful people who are taking care of our kids, beautiful people, just like the teachers, everyone are beautiful people, right? Great people, but never got any training in this, so they didn't know, right? So they set up behavior assessment and they set up the system around the female brain, which does words on both sides and connects words to feelings and words to sensorials on both sides, okay? So when teacher says, it's time for story time, put that away, come sit in the circle for story time. Who is better at that? Yeah, the girls, they'll go, oh yeah, okay. And they'll put the stuff back in the cubby. And by the way, there's a 1 in 5 exception rate to everything I say, so you're right now going to know of a boy who immediately puts everything in the cubby, right? So always figure 1 in 5 exception rate. Always figure that, because I have to take things apart and talk about them separately, and the brain is very complex. So you're going to know someone where it's a boy. But if you go observe that community, you'll go, yeah, 4 out of 5 times at least. it's the boys who are still doing this thing over here. They're still doing it. They're building the thing, you know. Okay, it's time for story time. They're still doing it. Okay, it's time for story time, right? And you have to kind of get in their face or a little more, right? Yeah. And whereas the girls are more likely, because they've got both sides of the brain hear the words, it's time for story time. Both sides hear it and then connect it to like motivational centers in the midbrain that say, oh, I want to please the teacher, so I am going to do that. Or sensorial centers. Okay, I accomplished this, I'm good with that. Touching this, that feels good. I'll put it over here, touching that feels good. So it all really feels sensorially good to me. And plus I want to hear the story so that more of my verbal centers can get activated, right? So they don't know they're doing all that, but all that is going on. So they come over to story time. They've also got, I'm going to present it later, this thing called oxytocin, which makes them want to bond and connect with the teacher too. So they've got this whole package that's moving them that way. The boys, not as quickly. That's one little negative on the boys already, right there. And then about 5 minutes later, when we finally get the boys corralled, and by the way, a strategy, if you're in that world, you may know this strategy, but we're always teaching multisensorial contact with the guys, right? So if we're saying, come to story time, and the guy's not activated, what that means is not generally that he's behaviorally defective, actually, but that his brain is going to need more senses involved. So we're going to need him to look us in the eye. We're going to need to touch his shoulders. So we got the visual, we've got this tactile, right? And then the auditory, louder voice. Okay, Mike. By the way, I was on Ritalin as a kid, so I was trouble. Okay, Mike, it's time to come to story time, right? Okay, and what that is multisensorial, to get more of his senses involved to help his brain to move from this task that he's really engaged in to stop it, because we want him to come to story time. So then we have him come to story time, and what happens? Who tends to sit still better in the circle, right? So you know this. So the girls are, again, you're going to have an exception. I have a daughter, one of my daughters, we called her Tigger, because from, you know, Winnie the Pooh, because she was a bouncer like her dad, right? So a lot of girls will move around, absolutely. But in general, you're going to see that mostly the girls are going to be sitting there, and some of the guys, not all, but some of the guys are going to be doing what? What are they going to be doing? Yeah, kind of rolling around. What did you say here?
Fidgeting.
They're going to be fidgeting. Thank you. Fidgeting, rolling around. Touching, yes. Poking, touching, right? So they're involved in touch attachment, but we don't, in our behavioral assessment, that is not touch attachment, right? We don't write, great touch attachment there. we write, can't sit still, can't listen to teacher, maybe needs Ritalin. Right? I'm being a little hyperbolic, but you know what I'm saying. And by the way, some kids need Ritalin, so, but you get what I'm talking about, right? We can feel this. It's starting really, really young, where these wonderful, beautiful teachers were not trained in this, so they didn't know. And so that environment is set up around what we call a verbal emotive, verbal sensorial brain. Verbal emotive meaning talk, verbal, words, anything that produces words, so talk, read, and write is verbal. And then connecting to the senses, connecting to the emotive centers. It's not set up. Okay, so what's the male brain doing on the right? Remember, the males are not doing words, but the right is not blank. Okay, and we like to joke about it, but the right is not blank. Actually, what males have is heightened spatial mechanical centers and visual graphic centers. And by the way, girls on the right have visual graphic centers and spatial mechanical centers. But they also have verbal emotive, right? But guys don't, right? So what guys have on the right are these spatial mechanicals, visual graphics. And spatial is that objects moving through space. And we set this up, right, when we said, why do guys all over the world do these things where they throw things at each other? Like all the things you described, dodgeball, we did the darts, throwing the knife, jumping off of the top of the wall to jump in the pool, etc. That all involves the body as an object moving through space and or a mediating object, some object between me and him or me and her, an object that we throw back and forth. And if you have any doubt of this, like think back when guys think back to their relationships with their dads. What do they often remember that they did with their dads? Yeah, playing basketball, throwing a ball, baseball. You had something else? Soccer, fishing. Okay. Yeah, so often we remember doing these things with the dad, let's say, or with other guys that involve kicking a ball or throwing a ball, playing catch. Huge conversations happen while fathers and sons play catch, right? Or in this era, they may be doing it via video games, but unfortunately, you don't get to have the conversations, right? Before, you playing catch, you had the conversation, and or no words were ever spoken. But the reason that the son remembers it so well later is because it was a deeply emotive experience. It was a deeply emotive experience, but it didn't involve words. And so therefore, our systems are confused by it. Because our systems are like, no, if it's an emotive experience, gotta have the words, right? I would argue no. I don't think that's supported by the neuroscience. I think we can support it sociologically and psychosociologically. And I'm a therapist, so obviously I'm word prone, and I'm always helping guys with their words. But we make a mistake if we think that throwing a ball or throwing darts is in some way emotively inferior to talking about feelings. And that's a really, really important and huge concept, because to have systems change, that concept's going to have to permeate communities. If not, folks go, and I can say from decades of experience with this, folks will go, yeah, really fascinating, yeah, great, yeah. And then go back to the behavioral assessments that are highly verbal and that don't understand this kind of spatial intelligence or this kind of tactile intelligence, kinesthetic intelligence. And part of the reason is words are easier, and a lot of the systems that are pushing words so hard are systems that are female-driven systems. And I'll talk later about bi-strategic approaches, and I would never want to see female systems, moms, female teachers, do not have to change who you are, right? You get to be exactly who you are. The system, however, has to realize that if, for instance, in pre-K through 6, if it's 90% female, which it is, right? 90% nationally of our pre-K through 6 teachers are female, that they're great teachers, but if they're not trained in this, they're not going to know this. So they're going to overreact to or underreact to the way guys do emotives, the way guys are experiencing life. They're going to overreact or underreact, and it won't be malicious. It'll just be did not get the training. And I will ask for a show of hands. I think I know the answer. How many of you, when you got your training to be in whatever field you're in, everyone here is in a child development field. How many of you, when you got that training to be a teacher, a Head Start person, a parent, right? As a parent, we get training. Mental health, therapist, whatever you are. How many of you got a one-semester course in male and female brain? Right? No one. And that's everywhere I go. It's the same thing. So we all walked into those systems. These beautiful women, beautiful women, walk into those systems, and those systems are 90% female, and they've shifted toward a really verbal format, and that's an easier format, I would argue, for female brain and for some guys. You know, some of us guys are really verbal who get into child development. So it's a way to go, but it creates the systems failure. And the failure is not the teachers. The teachers are great. The parents are great. The mental health professionals are great. We're all really good people. Our argument is, our work is to retrain everyone, to get them the training and the interventions so that they can expand out from beyond where they start. And that includes guys. There are a lot of guys who think they're good at working with boys. They're not so good, you know? And there are a lot of guys who think they're good at working with girls. And we actually have to train them and say, oh no, this stuff you're doing with girls, that's going to backfire. Understand the female brain. So this is not, you know, going after one group or the other. It's about retraining. So when we retrain, we start saying, oh, wow, male and female brain do all these things differently. And as you'll see on this, gender has low plasticity. So everyone's probably heard of neuroplasticity, right, where you can change your brain. And it's a wonderful, wonderful concept. But the folks who do it, like Daniel Amen, whose scans I'll show you, anyone who's doing it, they're not talking about gender or sex on the brain, which is a structural issue, unless they're the gender fluidity people who just avoid it, who just say the science is bad, it doesn't exist. Most people talking about plasticity are not talking about what we're talking about. What they're talking about is if you do Sudoku, you can actually create, epigenetically, you can create some new cells in the hippocampus, the memory center. That is true. That's neuroplasticity, right? But gender or sex in the brain is structural. You don't change the structure of the brain. The brain comes out as it is structured to come out. You can traumatize that brain and affect the way that brain does its gene expression, and then you can pass that trauma on to the next generations. But the structure of the brain is male, female, again, unless you're transgender, in which the structure of your brain is female to male or male to female. But generally, 99.5-ish% of folks are male brain, female brain on a spectrum of about 7.2 billion people. So a lot of ways to be male, over 3.5 billion ways to be male, or 3.5 billion ways to be female, but still male and female. So this stuff has low plasticity. In other words, you're not going to change it. You can affect skills development for each child, but you're not going to get that brain to restructure if it's structured in utero as male brain, female brain. And that's why this stuff is key and why training is key, to get everyone to sort of recognize it.